Hi, my name is Grant, and I'm a postdoc at UC San Diego. Today I'm going to talk to you about some work that I did with a number of wonderful colleagues on how we can better protect enterprises against sophisticated attacks. We've seen that attackers have consistently been able to breach perimeter-level defenses that enterprises deploy. Thus, our work starts by assuming that we have an attacker who's already managed to compromise some internal machine within an enterprise's network. And the goal of our work is to be able to mitigate or quickly detect subsequent attacker activity that occurs even after they've established this initial foothold. It turns out this is an interesting question to explore because attackers often need to move beyond their initial point of compromise to achieve their goal. Consider a ransomware attack where attackers want to compromise many internal machines. Similarly, when attackers want to steal sensitive data, they often need to move to databases or servers that lie deeper within the enterprise's environment. And this is true across many, many attacks that we've seen in practice. So our work studies one kind of malicious internal movement or malicious activity known as lateral movement. And this is the movement that attackers make between internal machines within an organization. Our work aims to develop practical detection for lateral movement. We start by assuming that the attacker has an internal machine which they launch their attacks from, and they want to be able to eventually move onto or acquire access to some target machine Z. The goal of our system is to be able to detect this kind of malicious movement with very few false positives. Now, prior work tries to solve this problem by applying traditional anomaly detection. That is, anytime their prior systems identify anomalous activity or anomalous movement, they flag that as an attack. And there are many different approaches ranging from manual rule sets to data mining approaches to newer deep learning methods. Now, the problem with these anomaly detection approaches is that they generate way too many false positives to be used in practice, on the order of hundreds per day based on their evaluation results and when we re-implemented prior state-of-the-art systems on our own data set. And these systems generate too many false positives because modern-day enterprises are very large, complex environments with tons of anomalous activity that is ultimately benign. So our work, Hopper, is a system designed to detect lateral movement with very few false positives. And in fact, we're able to detect many different types of attacks with less than 10 false alarms per day. And this is based on an evaluation using 15 months of real-world data from Dropbox's internal corporate network. Another nice aspect of Hopper is that it needs no labeled data to operate. Because most organizations don't have many known instances of lateral movement, this is actually quite helpful in practice. Now, Hopper is able to achieve these good results by looking for paths of movement that are suspicious based on structure that is fundamental to live movement, and not just by applying naively statistical anomaly detection. So the starting point for how Hopper works and how many of these prior systems work is to model movement events in the form of a graph. In particular, movement between machines generates data known as login records. Anytime a machine remotely accesses another one, say through SSH or RDP, or one of these command line protocols that uses something like Kerberos, traditionally, in most enterprises, these kinds of login attempts or movement attempts generate login records that record fairly standard information, such as the time at which the session started, the username or credentials involved, and the two machines involved in the connection. So to do detection, what we're first going to do is we're going to aggregate a set of historical logins and build a graph that characterizes what normal movement looks like. Then, at test time or deployment time, as new login events occur, our system is going to analyze them to see if they form a suspicious path of movement. And if so, it will flag that movement for the organization's security team to analyze. So the key technical question here is, what does it mean for a path to be suspicious in a concrete manner? Now, for our work, we took a step back to identify this. We said, why are attackers making lateral movement in the first place? And in most scenarios, we're concerned with an external attacker who wants to access some sensitive data or capabilities within the organization. Now, most organizations with least privilege, such sensitive permissions or data are restricted to a handful of users, say system administrators like Alice. That means that when an attacker compromises your average user, say Bob, while Bob has access to some machines and data within the organization, Bob will lack access to the target machine. And this is where lateral movement comes into play. The attacker will take Bob's compromised machine and credentials and use them to access shared servers that Bob does have access to. They'll then run local privilege escalation exploits that obtain root permissions on this new machine and dump credentials that might be stored in memory or on disk, or install keyloggers that steal the credentials of other users who have also accessed the shared server. Once they've acquired these new credentials, they'll then access additional servers that their credential set gives them access to, and iteratively repeat this process by compromising new machines and stealing new credentials that are found on those machines, until they can eventually access or acquire a set of privileged capabilities that gives them the access they want. Once the attackers acquire this privileged set of credentials, they'll of course use them to access their target machine. And so this two-step process highlights two key properties that lateral movement paths will exhibit. First, the path will contain one or more logins that uses a new or unexpected set of credentials. By this, I mean the attacker started on a machine using Bob's credentials and then made movement that Bob is purportedly making himself. However, along the way, Bob switches to using Al's set of credentials to access the machine. And this is weird because Bob's movement should be under his own credentials, not under another user's. Second, suspicious paths or attack paths will start off on one user's machine using one set of credentials and access the machine or database that the user did not have legitimate access to. That is, the attack path starts off using Bob's credentials, but Bob eventually accesses a machine which his credentials don't allow him to access. And so these two key properties characterize many kinds of lateral movement attacks. They won't capture all attacks. There are some that won't exhibit these two properties, but in many, many real-world attacks, the attacker's movement, their lateral movement path, does exhibit these two key properties. And so Hopper tries to identify paths with these two properties and then alerts on them for the security team to analyze. Now, it turns out identifying paths with those two properties is quite hard in practice. I'm going to highlight just two of the key subproblems and give you a high-level intuition, and you can see our paper for more details. First, I keep talking about paths, but it turns out that actual real-world data doesn't tell us about paths. Actual real-world data only gives us point-wise activity of individual logins between two machines. So for instance, given login L4, it's not clear which of these three inbound logons is paired with L4 or forms the conceptual path made by the same user. That is, there's no causality or linkage information in these login events. They just report point-wise activity, and they don't tell you anything about subsequent or prior logins that are related to it. So it's not clear whether a user made login L1 before making login L4, or whether they made login L2 or L3 before making L4. And establishing this causal relationship, this linkage, is key to identifying what a path is in the first place. So in our work, we proposed some inference methods that allow us to establish the relationship or infer it, in part using some enterprise domain knowledge. And this allows us to say when two logins or when multiple logins forms a path made by the same user. Now, these are inference methods, so they're not going to be perfect, and that could lead to false negatives. So in our approach, we apply a conservative inference method. When we cannot cleanly infer when logins are related, when there's ambiguity, we in fact infer multiple potential paths of movement that could have been made by a single user. Now, this could produce many, many false positives. So our approach is to apply a new approach to anomaly detection, which we call specification-based anomaly detection. The idea here is that we're going to reduce the false positives generated with this conservative inference by selectively applying anomaly detection to find truly anomalous paths that could potentially exhibit both suspicious properties. That is, we analyze all the paths that our system infers, we identify ones that could contain both suspicious properties, and then we selectively apply anomaly detection to find ones that are both potentially suspicious and also highly anomalous. And this combination allows us to generate very few false positives while detecting many attacks. Concretely, we evaluated our approach on 15 months of real-world data from Dropbox's internal corporate network. And this is employees or services moving between machines within their internal corporate environment. It doesn't involve user data, which is stored on a separate machine or separate set of machines on a separate network. Now, this consists of hundreds of millions of real-world benign logins. And to evaluate our system, we analyzed how it performed against 327 different attacks, including one professional red team attack and a variety of simulated attacks spanning various goals and levels of stealthiness. It turns out the system can do quite well. Hopper is able to detect over 94% of attacks under less than 10 false positives per day. In contrast, when we re-implemented prior state-of-the-art system that used traditional anomaly detection, it turns out to detect the same number of attacks, prior state-of-the-art would need to generate over 8 times or nearly 8 times as many false positives as our work. And in particular, these prior state-of-the-art systems require a variety of hyperparameter tuning to achieve optimal performance. For our evaluation purposes, which you can read about in the paper, I tried a whole range of different parameter combinations. And this is just a snapshot of the best performing combination set that detected the same number of attacks as Hopper with the fewest false positives. And even under this optimal parameter set, prior state-of-the-art would need nearly 8 times as many false positives to detect or achieve as good performance as Hopper. And this key improvement is largely enabled by our idea, which is that we're going to look for suspicious structure based on key characteristics of lateral movement, rather than just naively applying anomaly detection. So in summary, our work argues that we can better protect enterprises by looking for malicious movement that attackers will make between internal machines in an enterprise's environment. Now, we can't just naively apply traditional machine learning or anomaly detection approaches, because modern-day enterprises are large, complex networks that contain lots of anomalous abundant activity. Instead, we need to identify key structural elements that are truly suspicious and then combine that with anomaly detection for practical usage. One of the key challenges here is that inferring when login events or movement events are causally related is quite challenging. Inferring these causal relationships is not easy to do. But being able to link pointwise movement events in this manner, establishing when a user is making consecutive movement steps, enables truly good performance and is necessary. Combining all these ideas together, we built a system Hopper that achieves really good performance on real-world data. Thank you so much for listening to this talk, and I'm happy to take any questions.